All right, joining me for this special episode is Jim Papp, the guy who basically ran the Afghan Air Force training program. Jim, let's start by talking about your experience as a U.S. Army helicopter pilot.
I flew the AH-64 Apache. I was predominantly serving overseas or deployed. I did a couple of short tours in South Korea, a couple of long tours in Germany. I was deployed to Bosnia-Herzegovina for Operation Joint Endeavor for almost a year. I did Operation Enduring Freedom 2005 to 2006 for 1 year. Flew out of Kandahar, Afghanistan, and then Operation Iraqi Freedom for 2007, 2008. So that was a 15-month deployment during the search and operated primarily out of Balad. I retired in 2010, and during a majority of my career with the Army, I served as an instructor pilot, a standardization pilot, and a squadron master gunner.
So you retired as a Warrant Officer 4, eventually wound up being a mentor for your Afghan pilot training program.
Raytheon got this service contract through the United States Air Force, specifically, the TAC Air, which is that portion of the U.S. Air Force that was, try to assist the Afghan government in building a Afghan Air Force. So that stood for Train, Assist, Advise, Command. So they had that contract. They gave Raytheon was the general contractor, and then they were responsible for basic flight training. The pipeline for creating pilots, not only rotary wing, but also fixed wing pilots. Where I particularly worked was a city called Al Ain, which is in the Abu Dhabi Emirate. Al Ain International Airport had a civilian aviation academy called Horizon International Flight Academy. So that's where they did rotary wing initial entry training. Generally, it was an 18-month program, included 3 months of English language training or additional English language training. And it also include what we called aviation English, which would help them immerse and get prepared for ground school on the flight line. So we can introduce, terminology, aviation phrases and words that you would not normally know, in conversational English. So they did 3 months of that. After that, they moved on to their ground school training, which was 6 topics that lasted 3 more additional months. So they were tested on that. So after 6 months, they finally went to the flight line, which lasted about a year. Those flight line included basic flight maneuvers, advanced flight maneuvers, instrument training. And then, of course, we would add basic combat skills. And then in the end, they were doing MBG qualification training. So this was 18 months. Once they've completed that, they would graduate, go through a graduation ceremony, pin on their wings, and then they would go on to the next phase of training. So that's when I would say goodbye to them. While I was there, that next phase of training was a Third Nation Academy, which was in Slovakia. And that was where they would do their advanced aircraft training. Qualification training was for the UH-60 Black Hawk and the MD-500 or the MD-530F aircraft. So they would do their advanced aircraft training. And so now that they have their wings and then they are qualified in that particular advanced aircraft, it's like a type rating. Then they would go back to Afghanistan, join their unit, and finish the final phase of training, which was mission training, which they do at the unit level.
Just to go big picture on the context, as I've documented on a different episode, I embedded in Afghanistan in 2010, in the spring of 2010, and spent a lot of time with Task Force Rakhisan, part of the 101st Airborne in Paktika province. And the focus there at that time was training the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. There was no Afghan Air Force initiative at that time. And I remember it was sort of an interesting contrast, to put it mildly, as we were going down Route Alpha towards Yahya Kel and Yosef Kel from Salerno and Sharana. We were in MRAPs and they were in Ford Ranger pickups. So I thought that was an interesting sort of force protection contrast. But now we fast forward about 8 years, and this is when the powers that be decided that we were going to train up the Afghan Army to have an Air Force component. And as you said, Jim, rotary wing, we're looking at Blackhawks, Little Birds, fixed wing, Super Tucanos, C-130s, any other sorts of airplanes in the mix there?
They had the Caravan, the C-208 Caravan, which is a very rugged, very reliable, efficient airframe. And then they had an attack. They called it the AC-208, which was the attack Caravan. So which was pretty neat. They basically stuck a sensor, a designator, and put some Hellfires on it. Those are the type of airframes that they needed. There's something to be said about simplicity, something that's rugged and that's effective.
So in 2018, when this initiative began, um, the landscape in terms of America's involvement was still robust. Obviously, patience was wearing thin after, at that time, 18 years of involvement. And so you could see that the clock was ticking. No one could predict how rapidly the end game ultimately was at that time. But this program was sort of trying to get the Afghan defense posture where they could kind of do it themselves. Is that an accurate way to frame it?
Yes, when I came on board in 2018, you could see that there was, an emphasis or a priority on ramping up or trying to create more classes and get more people through the pipeline. Now, COVID did affect the process. I will say that COVID shut a lot of things down, not only in Afghanistan, but in these third nations where we're conducting training. It affected, had a big effect worldwide. Even prior to the Afghan government have fallen, there were means and contracts being awarded and funded and almost set up for maintenance, because we were all thinking ahead. Obviously, after the pullout, that we were not going to be able to have contractor support for maintenance in Afghanistan. So there were contracts already set up in the UAE. In fact, there were Afghan C-130s flying into Al Ain International Airport with MD-530s that had battle damage or needed, major maintenance overhaul or phase inspections. That the plan was to do these major maintenance functions in the UAE, and it's not a long flight from Abu Dhabi or the Al Ain Airport to Kabul. So they were already thinking ahead, and things were already funded and were already moving, and they were already, in fact, had many airframes were sitting at the Al Ain International Airport when the government fell. And a lot of those aircraft ended up, U.S. government giving them to Lebanon, the Lebanon Army. But anyway, so obviously, how things ended up, I don't think anyone could have predicted. I don't think anyone did predict. The reality was, actually things fell apart before we had actually left.
So let's bring in two graduates of this syllabus. Joining us from Islamabad are Juma and Tamim, not their real names. Their faces are covered to protect their identity for security purposes. Hey, you guys, thank you for joining us at a late hour over there. How are you doing?
Hello, sir. Thank you. I'm happy to have me here. This is Juma from Islamabad.
And hello, sir. This is Tamim from Islamabad. We are good.
Let's talk about your motivation to enter this flight training program. Why did you want to become a pilot for the Afghan Air Force?
Actually, my grandfather was a military. I really liked his behavior, his character, and he motivated me to become a military. And when I was in grade 5, I decided to become a pilot. In 2016, I graduated from the National Military Academy of Afghanistan with the bachelor degrees of civil engineering, and I joined to the Air Force. I started taking aviation English courses. After 1 year, I selected as a rotary wing pilots, and I went to UAE. That time I met Mr. James Pope in UAE. He was our mentor, and I was class leader. And he shared his experience, his knowledge with me and with all my groups. I'd like to say thanks here to Mr. James Pope. He helped and supported me and our group in UAE.
So what was the most challenging part of the pilot training?
We did not knew anything about what's coming next for our flight phases. I think the flight phases were the most challenging phases of our training.
Every day we have different missions. We have different training. For example, we had auto rotation. We had some low level flight. It was very challengeable for us.
So you guys get your wings at the end of Jim's syllabus. Juma, you were flying the Black Hawk, the UH-60, and Tamim, you're flying the MD-530. Where did you guys go once you left the UAE? Did you go to Slovakia to learn how to fly each of those airplanes before you returned to Afghanistan?
After I graduated from the UAE and I got my wing, I went directly to Slovakia and I started advanced training for UH-60 Black Hawk. And after 10 months in Slovakia, I went back to Afghanistan. I started duty in Kandahar Air Wing.
After finishing the UAE, we went back to Afghanistan, and there we had our MD-530F training with our American instructors.
What year are we talking about that you guys got back to Afghanistan? By this time, is it like 2019, 2020 timeframe?
I got back to Afghanistan on October 2018, and then we went to Kandahar Air Base there for our training, and the February 2019 I started our missions.
What were the nature of these missions? Were you flying in company with American units? Are you supporting American operations? Were you doing independent operations? What was going on in terms of the real world ops side of the house?
Well, basically we were operating on our side, and sometimes we had joint operations with the US and the NATO, and basically we were operating with our own side.
What was the morale like in the command? Did you guys have a feeling that you could win, that this was possible, or was it just sort of holding back the inevitable as long as you could?
It was possible for us. Every successful mission we had, it was very good. It had a great impact and with good results. We were hoping for a better future and a peaceful Afghanistan.
Obviously, it was disappointing what happened from basically the Doha Agreement through the summer of 2021, when things went downhill quickly, including the American withdrawal in August of 2021. You guys, as nationals who had worked closely with the Americans, and this is not unlike the circumstance that the folks who were interpreters faced, and I worked very closely with some Afghan interpreters when I was embedded with the 101st Airborne and watched those guys do amazing work. But now, as Afghanistan starts to fall back into the hands of the Taliban, obviously they're not liking folks who worked with the Americans in any form. So now you are at risk in terms of your personal safety. What did you do, Juma, to try to guarantee that you and your family would be safe?
When the Afghan government fell on 15 August 2021, I was in duty. I was inside the airport with my friends. All the forces were down except Afghan Air Force. The Afghan Air Force continued their duty until the end of the day. Inside the airport was US forces, and outside the airport was Taliban. We stayed inside the airport for 2 days without food and without water. After 2 days, we decided to go outside to find some food, some water, and I went outside. I went to my friend's house. After 2 days, I decided to enter the airport. And when I came and I showed my documents, there was a soldier of Taliban. I showed my document to him. He realized that I'm a pilot, a military pilot. He told me, "You fight against us for 20 years. Now it's time for revenge." And then he shot me, and he hit my upper leg. And I got high injury and I fall down. Then my friend took me to the hospital. After that, I left the airport and I go back home.
How about you, Tamim? What was your situation when Kabul was falling?
As we heard the rumors that the Taliban are entering the city, we said that we are ready to uh, fly and do not let them to enter the city, but the leaders did not let us, and they said no, it's not the time now. And we were inside the airport that night that the fall down happened. We went to the other side of the runway, and the U.S. forces were supporting us there in order to evacuate us. But early in the morning, they left us, and we didn't see much choice. And then we came back to the other side of the runway, to the military side, and uh, we were waiting for evacuation to get on board of the aircraft, and all at once the civilian people entered the runway, and the chaos happened, and we didn't have much choice. Inside the civilian people also, there were Taliban, so we left the airport. The next day, our advisor also called us to come by the gates and enter the airport. We were in front of the gates and telling them that we are here, and that was 25 August. And then our advisors told us to leave the gates because there is going to be explosion, and we left the gates. The next day on 26th, there was explosion.
That was the attack that killed the 11 American service members. So you guys witnessed firsthand the chaos, the C-17s with people holding onto the landing gear and people trying to get on, just complete hope against hope, the panic. What were your emotions after basically your entire lives of watching the Americans try to assist in creating a free and democratic Afghanistan?
We were in shock, totally in shock, no, not knowing the situation. We barely slept 1 hour or 2 hours at night, and we didn't have a better situation.
The place we live, they are all military, and the Taliban came and they checked all the houses. That time I was in contact with Mr. James Pop, and after I recovered, I was in my uncle's house, and I was changing my location day by day, and until the end of the day that I decided to come to Pakistan. Every day I change my location.
So, Juma just mentioned he was in comms with you. What were your emotions as you were watching all of this unravel like this? And what was your advice to these guys when you had the opportunity to talk to them?
I knew once U.S. forces had left the airfield, you know, there's that small window of opportunity. And I was talking to all these guys, just begging them, trying to, hey, you need to get over that wall. You need to get through that gate. You need to get on that airfield. Because as soon as U.S. forces leave, you know, the odds of them getting out is going to be extremely difficult. And if you look at a majority of the Afghans that have made it to the United States, who have made it to other countries, most of those occurred, you know, prior to the U.S. Forces departing. Post U.S. withdrawal, it was much more higher risk. The Taliban were using biometrics. They had checkpoints. They were checking at the border. For example, they would look at the border, and if they saw a passport with a UAE stamp, if they saw a passport with a Czech or Slovakia stamp, they knew you were a pilot. I got the ability to raise some money through family and friends of friends. I was also using my own money to use their facilitators to help these guys get visas, to pay for transportation, to get them across the border. It all required money. And as you know, that price kept getting higher and higher and higher to get these sort of things, and to find and to pay people that we could trust. Early on, it was even a situation about when they would cross the border at the Tokum border. They would cross early morning, less likelihood of Taliban being there, or less likely that a Taliban would check. Also facilitators that may pay or not pay to look at certain things. So that's what the money went into. The money went into hiring drivers and vehicles and facilitators to help them with visas, to get them over the border, to get them and then get them to the housing, which isn't cheap in Islamabad. So I used this organization to get these guys across, and I was funding it indirectly. So basically what happened was the Ukraine war kicked off, and whatever operational plan that they were highly confident on ended, stalled, didn't happen. So this particular group had 100 plus people that they were housing in Islamabad, and the funding was based on, well, they're going to be there a month, maybe a 2, maybe 3, and then they're going to move on to Albania. Well, that didn't happen. And trying to house 100 plus people, month after month in Islamabad was very, very expensive.
So basically, Jim, your motivation is a function of you started this initiative by creating a robust syllabus that was going to give these guys the tools to defend themselves from the air and help win this war and stymie the threat. And then as things start to go south, what we see is what looks to be a abandonment of our responsibilities, not to get political, but I know this is how folks who are friends of mine who served as platoon leaders and different things felt about the interpreters that they worked with. And so at this point, let me bring in Admiral Tim Flynn. Tim, Academy Class of 79, so that means you're one of my firsties.
That's true.
Tim was a member of the last all-male class. These guys like to make a big deal out of that. Welcome, sir. So you're kind of the conduit for this situation between the not-for-profit and various agencies. So describe the work that you're doing and what the situation is, what the pressure points are, what the frustrations are.
First, I want to say it's the first time I've met Juma and Taman, and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege to meet both of you and your 17 fellow pilots. Jim Papp's done incredible work keeping things going, and the team that came back together, I call it bringing the band back together from some earlier evacuation efforts. We're happy to do so, and honestly, we're going to get you out. My main job is to run the process. And like everything else, when you're dealing with the State Department and the Department of Defense, there's a pretty extensive process. We had great support on of the professionals at DOD and the State Department. And but the first thing has to happen, and that's the hard work, is the refugees have got to get out of Afghanistan. And in my previous operations, we had to facilitate that. But this time, thanks to Jim Papp and his colleagues, we didn't have to go down that path. That's the most dangerous path. So the first stop was with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And within that group, there's an actual Office of Special Coordinator for Afghanistan. And inside that group, there's a Priority Refugees Referrals Team. And when you find that group, you're finally able to make things happen. Jim Papp provided the ID cards, their military IDs, and some other certifications from their flight training. And we were able to match that with actual records of former Afghan National Army. And the results were OSD provided case numbers for each of the pilots. And once we had that, we were able to start making some progress with the Department of State. They actually have a group called the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration that assign now Afghan referral record numbers for Priority 1 cases. Priority 1 meaning refugee cases. And then they reached out to each pilot and individually confirmed their locations. And an admissions coordinator, this is an organization that stood up just to take care of the 19,000 P1 and P2 refugees that are living in Pakistan right now. But an admissions coordinator in another office called the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program actually took control of the referral process for all the pilots. So I can tell you, Juma and Taman, you're being tracked very carefully now by this organization. They've started extensive security checks on all of you, and that's based on your input. Each of you gave me 10 years of email addresses and cell phone numbers, and that's in process right now. And in addition to that, you're going to be contacted next to be interviewed by a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services officer, and that'll probably happen in Islamabad, probably at the embassy, the U.S. Embassy. And as it gets closer to resettlement time, you'll be given medical screening. That'll be for you and your family members, your wives and your children, for those that have them. And then actually a refugee coordinator in Pakistan will ultimately decide that you meet all the wickets for resettlement in the United States. And the end game is just picking one or two locations where you want to live. And ideally, there's one family member in a certain city that you'd go there. But if not, you'll still go to the United States and fly there commercially. So all of this takes about 12 months minimum. And that's why we're here. And that's why we're so grateful, Ward, that you're giving us this opportunity to get our message out there. It's not cheap. Living in Pakistan, when you're kind of on the run, really, especially when you have these skills, combat proven, pilots who flew missions, real missions. There's a lot of people that would like to hire them, including the Taliban, which obviously isn't an option here. So staying safe, staying healthy, and participating in this process is really important right now. It takes more than what Jim Papp and his team have been able to generate funding wise. We estimate it's about $5,200 per month for subsistence, and that's living in a house that actually has running water, a house that has air conditioning when it's 115 degrees outside. There's some medical treatment, especially for these young babies and the young wives who are going to have babies. And then there's the documents. Everything comes down to paperwork, and the required documents can take $7,500 for an Afghan passport or a Pakistan visa extension. And then there's an exit permit for those we really assume that all 37 will need exit permits because all of their Pakistan visas will have expired by the time we're able to move on resettlement. That's about $17,000. So when you add it all up, that's about $86,000 just to make it 12 months. And then when you move over to the United States, we wanted to give them at least $5,000 apiece. So that's another $100,000. So that's why it's so important that we get this message out and get the help we need to sustain them through the process, and then to get them to the United States with at least enough funding to start getting completely indoctrinated and resettled in the city that they choose. And these aren't ordinary people. These are Afghans' top guns. And we owe this to them. And we really want to see this through and, get this process where it's expedited and that they can safely depart Pakistan and bring their families to the United States.
Well, you said that very well, Tim. Is your sense that the U.S. government feels as you do that we owe this to them, or are you hitting some sort of attitudinal issues that are concerning on the government side?
For this case, I have been blown away by the expert assistance of state and DoD, dedicated individuals who answer the phone, who give you prompt response, who are on top of things. I have been very, very appreciative of how state and DoD have supported this effort.
That's great to hear. So as you said, both you and Jim have said this takes money to do right. How can the viewers of my channel help with this effort?
I'm glad you asked that. One of our teammates from the earlier evacuation flights actually is part of a 501c3. It's a company called 2430 Group, and he has generously allowed us to have a web page on his website where you select that. It takes you right to the place where you can make a donation with a credit card. You get a receipt for that for tax purposes. Or if you're a company and you want to wire money, there's wiring instructions there. And that's been our way to move out of the hat in hand approach to donations and into a systematic way to through the 501c3 to get the dollars we need to sustain them in Pakistan, but also to move them into the United States.
So I will put that link in the episode description of this episode. So I do encourage my viewers to help out. This is the right thing to do, having been on the ground in Afghanistan and watched how the nationals fought alongside us for their own freedom to determine their own destiny. And then the notion that we left them with a false promise doesn't sit well with me. So we have got to do right by folks like Juma and Tamim. And this is a great venue for doing that. So please help us out here. And again, the link to do that will be in the episode description. Tim, Jim, and especially Juma and Tamim, thank you for taking the time to share your experiences in getting trained and learning how to be Afghan pilots. And I love when Tim says, we're going to get you guys out. That does my heart good, and I know he means it. So in the meantime, you two guys there in Islamabad, be safe. Keep your family safe. And Jim and Tim, please keep us posted as this unfolds and develops.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.